Alrighty. Shall we get the ball rolling? Yes? Okay. I will introduce myself very briefly. I'm Lynn. Nice to meet you all. I am from Plastic Free Toronto, an organization, it's not even an organization, an Instagram page that I run with my sister, where we like to gather people together, educate them, and empower all of us to make small changes that have big impacts in a very fun and welcoming way. I'm also an actor and a model. I'm currently in New York. So our quick agenda to run through it. Rafaela from U of T is going to be talking a little bit about the problems with single-use plastics, particularly foodware, because that's something that we can all relate to and that is a huge issue. Next, Emily from the Toronto Environmental Alliance, who I'm sure most of you know, is then going to outline some of the benefits of reuse. Some are obvious, some you might not have thought of before. Our vision of a reusable Toronto is going to be shared with us by Scott from an amazing company called Dream Zero and Muse as well. He is a game changer in Toronto and across the country, to be honest. So I'm excited to hear from him about other reuse solutions. And finally, we'll hear a bit about some upcoming federal and municipal policy opportunities, which is where we can really start to create that systemic shift so that we're not all just like running around trying to do our best individual things, but we can really have collective impact to create the change we need to see. And then, of course, we're going to open it up to converse with all of you who took the time to come here today and both learn and share what you have to say. So without further ado, I will let you know who Reusable Toronto is. So Reusable Toronto is an initiative convened by the Toronto Environmental Alliance that brings together and builds a movement of support for a shift away from single use towards reuse, if that wasn't evident by the title. Reusable Toronto is guided by a steering committee and includes a growing network of local community organizations, reuse champions, zero waste businesses, researchers, and community members. So we've come together with the shared goal of advancing a zero waste future for Toronto, which we believe is very, very possible. And yeah, let's find out how we can shift from single use to reuse. Rafaela, take it away.
Thank you, Lee. Hello, hi everyone. I'm Rafaela from the University of Toronto Trash Team, and I'm going to start with a very quick review of the problem. The fact is, we consume a lot more resource than our planet can sustain. Our one-way throwaway system is wasteful. If you think upstreams, we are consuming natural resource, energy, and cause pollution to manufacture and transport all the items that we consume. And when you think downstreams, when we are done with it, our garbage, recycling, and composting systems just can't keep up. This affects the environment, but as Lynn said, we also need to remember that Indigenous communities, low-income communities, and people of color are disproportionately impacted by pollution and harm caused by this wasteful system. Next slide, please. And plastic is the starkest example of this. Plastic is made from fossil fuel, as we all know, and its production is increasing. It's expected that by 2040, we will be using 3 times more plastic compared to the year of 2015. Half of all plastic produced each year is for single-use products and packaging. And when we are done with it, unfortunately, only 9%, less than 10%, is getting recycled globally. The rest goes to landfill, gets incinerated, or ended up in the environment. And if we think specifically about the city of Toronto, a litter audit done by the city in 2020 showed that 95% of the large plastic street litter in Toronto is disposable food and beverage packaging. But it's not just plastic that's the problem. The biggest issue is that regardless the material, we consume a lot of single-use foodware that's used only once and then discarded. That includes cups, containers, and accessories used to serve food in local restaurants. For example, some groups here in Canada are estimating that Canadians use 1.6 billion single-use cups every year. And cups, lids, and straws that go with them are the third most literally large item in Toronto. Also, a lot of foodware doesn't get recycled or composted because it's usually too contaminated with food or used on the go. So what is the alternative for that? Some companies are promoting alternative materials as a solution that we can just switch from plastic to these items and keep consuming as we go now. There are a number of different and unregulated terms used like compostable, biodegradable, plastic, plant-based, or bioplastic. And this can apply to many different materials like a paper container with a waterproof coating, or bamboo cutlery, or things that look or feel like plastic. Some are even made of fossil fuel, actually. And all of these materials also have a high upstream footprint with intensive industrial forestry or agriculture using energy and water to process into a single-use product. Finally, toxic additives are used in these products to make them plastic-like. This includes the grease and waterproof lining on paper containers and additives in bioplastics. So it's a huge problem. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thanks. Unfortunately, they also don't solve the waste problem. Most compostable or biodegradable single-use items aren't getting composted. Several studies found that commercially available biodegradable plastics failed to meet biodegradation standards and did not fully degrade within the time they were supposed to. And while bio-based plastics are made from plant-based materials, they are just as long-lasting in the environment as traditional plastics. Finally, compostable plastics need special facilities to allow them to degrade. If a city does not have this, then the material goes to the landfill or is littered, where it will remain in the environment just like conventional plastics. It's very important to note that almost no municipal or commercial composter in North America have the facilities to process every kind of compostable product. These materials require a long compost cycle, or they get removed along with all other plastics and contaminants at the start of the process. So for too long, we have focused on managing waste and on making things recyclable or compostable. But that just isn't working. Around the world, the amount of plastic and waste is skyrocketing, and our waste system just can't keep up anymore. And we need to focus on reducing and preventing waste in the first place. And we can do that by shifting our single-use products to reusables. The good news, next slide, please. Thank you. The good news is that Toronto business are ready for this. The University of Toronto Trash Team, us, and the Toronto Environmental Alliance, interviewed a dozen local restaurants and cafes across Toronto last year. And almost every business we spoke to said they are already taking steps to reduce waste in their business, like eliminating unnecessary disposable or letting customers bring their own cup. The results show that the environment impact was a top consideration for them when choosing foodware for their restaurants. And business owners said they welcome more support from the city, include helping to educate customers and provide guidance on how to reduce waste. They also note that a citywide regulations would help level the playing field and make it easier for them to make change without fear of upsetting customers, which is a super valid point. We also know that Toronto residents and customers are ready for a shift away from disposable. So the City of Toronto consulted with the public about single-use waste, and the overwhelming majority of the tens of thousands of respondents support a strategy that includes regulation to restrict single-use items. The U of T trash team and the T surveyed 100 customers in waterfront neighborhood just this year, like a couple of months ago, and we about reducing waste and single-use plastics. And I am very happy to report that 92% of those participants think that business should do more to reduce the amount of single-use foodware they use. And 89% of the participants think that restaurants and coffee shops should have to provide reusable cups and dishes when they dine in. So that is really good news, knowing that people were interested in switch from single-use to reusable foodware. So now I will hand it over to Emily to talk more about the benefits of making the shift to reusable. Emily.
Thank you for going all through that, Rafaela. So we've heard so far about some of the problems with single use that a lot of you may know about, and that we need to shift our focus to reusables. So what do we mean by that? A shift to reusable foodware means reusable dishes in restaurants and at events, getting your coffee in your own reusable mug, or if you forgot it, borrowing one from the cafe. This shift to reusables instead of single use requires more durable and heavier dishes, more washing and transportation. But even with all of that, a number of studies have shown that reusables are better for the environment. Reports done by academics, nonprofit groups in the EU and the US have looked at dozens of life cycle analysis studies, and they found that on balance, reusables are the best environmental option. I'm going to share some of the key findings and statistics from those reports. Every time a cup or dish is reused, the environmental footprint goes down until eventually it is lower than the single-use option. Depending on the material type, transport distance, efficiency of the dishwasher, or other factors, the point at which reusables become better than the disposable version varies. But in every study, there's always a point when the reusable is better than the disposable for the environment. It can be as few as 2 uses or 122 uses. Also, it's good to remember materials like glass, ceramic, and steel can be reused thousands of times. This graphic and some of the others I'm using are actually from a group called Upstream Solutions in the US. They have a great report called Reuse Wins that we can share the link for that later because it's got really great information. Reusables also save water. The processing of single-use products consumes a lot of water. For example, making 500 single-use paper coffee cups requires 1,400 liters of water. In contrast to a single cup that's washed 500 times, that only needs 200 liters of water. Reuse is also better for the climate. When we compare the full life cycle of disposable cups, paper, plastic, compostable, on the left side of this chart, we can see that the carbon footprint is between 3 and 10 times higher than using a reusable ceramic, steel, or glass cup. Those are the light bars on the right. Single-use cups and containers are more expensive than reusables. A study done in Quebec in 2014 calculated the cost to serve 1 cup of coffee per day for a year. The cost of 365 cups and lids plus the waste management cost worked out to be more than 10 times higher than buying 1 ceramic mug that can be reused an average of 500 times, even when you include the washing costs. They also found that even if the mug was only reused 100 times in a less efficient dishwasher, it's a third of the cost of buying disposables. There's also a number of case studies that prove that reusables cost less. Another great US project is called Rethink Disposable. And over 10 years, they worked with more than 300 restaurants, schools, and universities to help them swap some or all of the disposable dishes for reusable ones, showing in every case that they could save money. Then they went back to 130 of them and confirmed that every single one of them saved money. On average, the program reports the businesses saved between $3,000 and $12,000 US per year. Some of them saved a lot more than that. And they also reduced waste by between 500 and 1,000 kilograms. One important finding that they had was that a lot of small businesses underestimate the amount of money that they're currently spending on disposables and waste management. And a lot of small businesses think that the cost of new reusables and the labor and washing costs are going to be a lot higher than they turn out to be when they actually start using reusables. And in addition to these benefits for the local businesses and the environment, reuse is also good for the community. It creates good local green jobs. Reuse creates indirect and direct jobs. There are a range of estimates, but a conservative one from the US EPA says that reusing 10,000 tons of waste can create nearly 300 jobs, while disposing of the same amount creates only 6. And reuse jobs are local jobs. Collecting, washing, and distributing reusable containers has to be done locally. This is in contrast to importing and exporting disposables. This is a big economic opportunity for our city and our region. So now that we've talked about the problem and reviewed some of the benefits, I'm going to hand it over to Scott, who will talk about the Reusable Toronto vision for our city.
All right. Hello. Oh, let me just turn on my camera. There we go. Hello, everybody. Looks like a good crowd out there. Good presentation so far, everyone. Well done on the slides. All right. So my name is Scott. I am co-owner of a company called Dream Zero. We are a contract washer, which means that we wash dishes for restaurants, catering companies, and then we have our own event stock. And then on top of that, we also run a company called Muse in Canada. Muse is a reusable packaging platform that helps consumers borrow cups and containers for free. I'm going to talk about the vision of Reusable Toronto, and I'll briefly be touching on some of the reuse solutions that are being rolled out here in Toronto and the policies that other cities are using to encourage reuse in their food and beverage industries. All right, let's start with focusing on reducing unnecessary single-use accessories. So right now, many restaurants just automatically hand out utensils, plastic forks or wooden chopsticks, condiments and napkins, for example, whether you want them or not. And a simple solution is for a restaurant to just ask first if you want those things at all. And ordering apps could include a question to confirm whether customers want those accessories or not. We're seeing this with a few of them right now, but not enough. It's not across the board. This step makes a lot of sense, and it saves those companies money as well. Some cities and states have passed a law that requires every restaurant and app and even events to do this. Big cities like LA and Chicago and a few Canadian cities are jumping on board too. One change that can have a pretty big impact is serving food and drink on reusable dishes for dine-in. While some restaurants and schools are making this shift and finding it saves money, too many restaurants still automatically use disposable cups and dishes even when you're not going anywhere. Some cities and countries have recently passed laws to require restaurants, cafeterias, and even big events to provide reusables if it's not takeout. This photo is an example of McDonald's Happy Meal in France, and other cities and countries are passing similar laws. In Canada, the city of Edmonton will require all restaurants to offer reusable cups, and the city of Banff wants to require reusable dishes and cups. Their regulation is going to council next week. Amazing, Banff. Boom. This solution is one of many that we're already familiar with, allowing customers to bring their own cup or container. Many small and big businesses allow people to bring their own cups and bags. Of course, we saw a disruption to this during the pandemic. And some who still allow this are now still offering a discount. This is still just a small percentage of total takeout, and most businesses don't promote it or let their customers know that they can do this. In Toronto, groups like Roncy Reduces, shout out to Roncy Reduces if anyone is here, made up of volunteers promote this BYO approach. And they post a sticker in the window of the businesses to encourage people and to remind people to bring their own the next time that they come. Some Canadian cities are passing bylaws that require restaurants and cafes to have a clear process to accept customers' cups. The cities are providing guidance on how to do it with the local health guidelines and are providing free signage and posters to help explain it. For example, Vancouver, businesses now must charge a fee for all single-use cups. So this bylaw ensures that free option for customers to avoid the fee, which is pretty cool. Another exciting solution is providing reusable foodware for takeout. You may have seen these. These are some services in Toronto already doing this. Customers borrow a container and return it when they're done, just like a library. Some take a deposit, others have an app. You can see this from some of our images. Supply, for example, shout out to Supply if they're here. They have reusable containers. Muse, we have containers and cups and pizza containers and bags. And then there's Inwit, there's Friendlier Company. There's also a company called Pact, which is doing reusable bags for coffee beans. And there's quite a few different options out there on the market. When you find them, please share them. You know, people need to know about them. In Toronto, it is just voluntary that restaurants use these. But there are a few places around the world where this is being encouraged or it's being required by law. For example, in Germany and the Netherlands, restaurants will have to offer a reusable option for all takeout. In Vancouver, the city is providing incentives to help businesses start reusable cup or takeout programs by providing grants or help for businesses. Some other examples here in Vancouver right now, A&W and Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons was doing this in Burlington. I'm not sure if they still are, but they have reusable cups that you have a deposit, and then when you return it, you get the deposit sent to you via their app, and then you can then deposit that into your bank account. And last and not least, Toronto hosts a lot of major events this year at stadiums, arenas, concert halls, street festivals. To think about that scale, it's estimated that a typical US stadium hosts 300 events each year, which will use more than 5 million plastic cups. Sports and event venues are a good place to shift to reuse. They're a closed environment with limited vendors, and all the drinks and food are consumed on site. So the venue already has to supply and collect all the cups and dishes. A number of stadiums and events have already made the shift to other reusables, sometimes at the request of a musician for their concert, but increasingly for all events. There are great examples in Australia, New Zealand, where major events have eliminated single use. Some local events this past summer provided reusable dishes, like, for example, Dream Zero provided dishes to Withrow Farmers Market, Evergreen Farmers Market all summer, and then also the Eco Fair, Garlic Festival. Garlic Festival, I think we avoided nearly 5,000 single-use items by having all reusables there as the default. So that was fantastic. The reusables for dine-in policy in Berkeley, California, for example, and the one that's being proposed for Banff will require events and festivals to have reusable foodware too. And just to recap, here are some reuse solutions that we're seeing in Toronto and around the world, and I'll pass it back to Emily to talk about the opportunities and what's next. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Scott. That was really a whirlwind tour through a lot of exciting ideas. As we saw, there's a really big shift towards reusable that's happening. And while all of us can do our best to make changes in our own lives and, talking with our local businesses, I think, the problem is really too urgent to wait for every business to volunteer to make that shift. So we know that with strong public support and business support, our governments are starting to feel that pressure. And they're looking at ways that they can use regulations. And we're seeing some regulations in other places, and there's some great regulations happening right here. So federal government has a plastic strategy. It has a target of eliminating plastic waste by 2030. So they want all plastic to be reduced, reused, or recycled so that by 2030, there is no plastic waste ending up in the environment or in landfill. A key part of this, or incinerator, sorry. A key part of this is a ban on 6 single-use plastic items. This is a good start for Canada, but of course, it's a pretty short list. These items were chosen because they frequently show up as litter. As we heard a little bit before about some litter audits that are happening all over Canada. They're harmful in the environment, and there are less harmful alternatives. I want you to see, the bags, stir sticks, cutlery, straws, and six-pack rings. But some foodware is actually a really exciting one. The federal government will be banning the most problematic foodware containers, including styrofoam, black plastic, PVC, and degradable plastic. So those are really difficult ones that cause a lot of harm. So those are going to be banned as well. The ban is being phased in next year. So about a year and a week from now, every restaurant, business, and store in Canada will not be allowed to give out or sell or distribute these items. So all of them are going to have to find another way to serve food. At the same time, our city is also taking steps to reduce waste. Starting in 2018, the city's been consulting on and developing a strategy to deal with single-use items. The city strategy includes a lot of the same items as the federal ban, but the city's regulation is also importantly looking at, isn't just about plastic, it's about reducing waste of any material type. The city doesn't want businesses to swap single-use plastic for another type of single-use item. That doesn't reduce waste, it just shifts waste to a different waste stream. So currently, right now, the city's in the first voluntary phase where the city's providing encouragement and support for small businesses to help them make the shift, large businesses too. And in 2023, sometime in the next few months, council will vote on phase 2, which will include a set of regulations. During the public consultation process over the last few years, there's been really strong support from the public for regulations and for a combination of voluntary and regulatory measures. So this is pretty exciting. So that brings us back to Reusable Toronto's mission. Our mission is to champion reuse, to showcase the benefits for businesses and for our communities, and to build broad understanding and support. We want to ensure that when our governments are taking action on single use, they pass effective strategies that include policies and programs that help shift us towards reuse. So that's it for our presentation. I'm going to pass it back to Vince now. I'm going to turn off the slides.
Yep, I'm here.
There we go. Okay.
So let's introduce, we've got Emily from T. We've got Scott from Dream Zero. And we've got Rafaela from the U of T trash team. So we've got a wonderful distinguished panel. And there's also Lynn here too. So we've got lots of people here ready to support you. So we also have some questions coming in from Grant. Can a flexible straw be washed and reused? Does anybody want to field that question?
It's a great, I can jump in here because I've seen there's a little bit of conversation about straws in the chat, and I think this is a really important one. I think, I know that there are some serious accessibility concerns and needs for certain people to have access to straws to be able to drink beverages, especially when they're out in public. So I just want to say that we know that the City of Toronto has been really advocating to the federal government ban on single-use plastic straws does include some exemptions and some recognition that there should be access to straws that continues, and that's what we strongly support. The City of Toronto also is looking and has submitted their concerns to the federal government that the regulation that the federal government has put forward is a bit too restrictive. But it's just it's good to remember that like sometimes when we make these decisions about banning single-use items, we have to think about the equity impacts and who does this affect. So for example, as Scott mentioned earlier, in Vancouver, they started charging a single-use cup fee of 25 cents on every single-use cup, but they didn't also require the companies provide a reusable option. So very quickly, they found out that some low-income folks were really affected by that. So it's just a good reminder that we need to keep track of and consult with every community and make sure people really understand that there are accessible options. So just wanted to jump in on that. There's also some questions in the Q&A box, Vince. I don't know if you see that at the bottom in the middle. You can click the Q&A thing.
I will in just one second.
Sure.
And yeah, so thank you for pointing that out. There was one question from Mo, which is, if there's no plastic utensils, then what are the options? So is there somebody who wants to field that? And then we'll go to our Q&A questions.
You mean for takeout? That must be?
So we could do takeout and we could do, stay in, maybe.
Yeah, for dinings or for events or malls or things, food courts, we could use reusable metal ones and solve the problem. But if you are doing a takeout, there are options. You could start carrying your own cutlery set. I think it's well, I carry mine for a couple of years now. It's just a habit. You need to start to carry and put in your bag and leave it there. And you can go in place. Maybe in the future, maybe we go in a public place where you can have something that you can reuse and bring back. I don't know, but there are options right now. So especially if you're dining, they could provide you reusable cutlery with no difficulties.
And that was echoed by somebody in our chat who mentioned the Eaton Center is using a system kind of like what you were describing. So another question from one of our attendees is, what is the impact of individuals reducing plastic versus industrial processes? They're really thinking about getting away from this idea of sort of like, let's say, personal responsibility, or what is the role of personal responsibility as, compared to, the big industrial players out there?
Me?
I'm happy to jump in on that. Like, I think that's a great question. Right now, to be blunt, I think a lot of big businesses and companies benefit from us thinking that it's our fault when they make garbage that isn't recyclable, and when they make single-use packaging that they know can't be recycled, and they tell us that we're the ones who asked for it because it's convenient, and they tell us that it's our fault that we didn't recycle it properly. And frankly, I think, we need to demand better. We should say, if you can't recycle it, if it's not reusable, it should be banned. This is the kind of policy changes we're seeing in France, where they're saying, you know what, if it's not recyclable, you shouldn't be allowed to make it. If it's not compostable, you can't make it. So I think that it's true that we really should be looking at thinking about what we can do individually as a way to show what's possible, but there is a limit to that. And also, when we talk a lot about waste, a lot of industrial and commercial sites don't have much regulation. There aren't very good recycling rules in Canada or waste management rules for commercial sites. One of the reasons we're looking at these policies, or we're excited about these policies, is they would affect everyone, right? Like that McDonald's Happy Meal. I don't really like McDonald's, but seeing that picture makes me so happy. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. This behemoth, this huge fast food restaurant, their entire business model is based on disposables, and they have to figure out how to use reusables. So if we can push for those changes, and I think those changes would have to happen in every factory, every company, cafeteria, every school, and that really just has a cascading effect. I don't know if you want to add to that, Scott. You looked pretty excited.
I don't know, not much more than what you've already said. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The responsibility has been put on the consumer, and I guess we kind of take a bit of a free market point of view of that issue, where we're trying to make reusables as easily accessible to consumers and to restaurants, and we've got a lot to learn. I mean, it's hard to compete with single use. It's just so easy and it's so cheap. But that's exactly why there's no value for it downstream, because it is so cheap. It's made with the cheapest possible materials, and that's why so much of it gets released into the environment. And so, yeah, we're constantly figuring out ways to make it more attractive to people. Our program is free. Other programs might cost a little bit of money, but it's hardly anything. It's just a tiny little bit, and you do get a better experience with that too. I know with Supply and Inwit, they're using stainless steel containers, and that's a much better experience than talk to any chef. They much rather their food go into stainless steel than go into some plastic stuff, like some cheap single-use plastic stuff.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents.
I just want to include it that extended producer responsibility. That's something we should discuss all the time, because as Emily said, there is until a certain point in that us as an individual we can go, and it's government responsibility, it's producer responsibility. Who is producing the waste? They are also needs to help to solve the problem and start to make less waste, and how we can do a more sustainable and circular economy in a way that is not, we cannot say circular economy as a recycling, but we have to start to like go over it and start to really thinking of reusable alternatives for that. So as Emily mentioned, when we start, you should not be allowed to produce or create a new plastic or a new product that doesn't have a circular economy, doesn't have a circularity. Yeah, so we should start to think more of that, and start to complain and start to make your voice heard about this as well. So the same way when we go to classrooms and we talk with kids, it's like, hey, you can write a letter to your counselor, you can write a letter to your groups and let you know that you're not happy with one of the items. We as adults should keep doing that as well, and pushing and make things change, because we are part of the system, but we, as a consumer, we are not only the one who only want to be blamed or to be penalized for that situation. I think we really need to include other groups in this discussion. Yeah.
So a shout out to some of the other people in chat. There's lots of conversation in the chat. I love to see the chatter. So a little tidbit from Lee Adamson, trying to close the distance between what we see. What if we were to stick a live camera on Toronto's garbage dump so that we could actually see what was going in there and be like, hey, it's reducing our psychological distance. So thank you for that contribution. And let's go to our next question. Which is there somebody who can talk about the health of the glass industry, specifically, like, is it doing okay? It seems like it might have had unfavorable economics this person is concerned about. Any comments there?
I feel like I'm the one who maybe should answer this one. As far as I know, glass recycling in Ontario is doing okay. I know that one of the systems, or I think I saw a little bit of that comment, that in some US cities last year, because recycling is so expensive, and as Scott said, the materials are actually so low value, and unlike in Ontario, some other places don't have producer responsibility where the companies that make this packaging have to pay to help recycle it. Some US cities had to just cancel the recycling programs altogether when their economics get bad and they can't afford to recycle, which is a really sad thing to hear, that all these resources are just getting dumped. In Ontario, the companies that make this packaging have to contribute to the cost of recycling, as Rafaela called it. It's called extended producer responsibility. And starting next year, they're going to take over the full cost of all that recycling. So there's a bit more funding for glass recycling in Ontario. But I'm actually going to use this as an opportunity to throw in another cool idea, which is about the beer store. I think I saw Victoria mention this in the chat earlier. The beer store in Ontario has been running for almost 100 years. They started in like 1927. And they are actually an amazing example of reuse and refill. So what they do, the beer store manages, it's like a cooperative of like the major beer companies, and they take all of the deposit return containers from all the LCBO and every alcohol bottle sold in Ontario. But those brown bottles, called industry standard brown bottles, are actually refilled. They're cleaned, refilled, and sent out again to all the brewers, and they're reused 15 times. So I think last year they collected something like a few million, maybe 3 million, I can't even remember the number, but they have like a 98% return and refill rate. So that's an example of like very profitable companies going out there, refilling glass bottles and using them. And part of it is because they made an agreement with the Ontario government that they're going to do this, and it's just economical. So once you get that scale, it can be really, really easy. So it just, it's not this boutique reuse dream. It's not just for downtown vegan restaurant. It's not just for big cities. It can be across the entire province, and we can have reuse. So something we should learn from.
So another question that we have came from Lee, actually, saying, what are kids, teens, like there may be an opportunity to work through young people to reach the adults in their lives. So what are schools doing around reusable? So any thoughts, feelings, knowledge on schools?
So the school, TDSB, they have eco schools, and they have certificated for schools that are doing things to reuse, to reduce waste in the school. So they have a waste audit, they have campaigns that runs by the students and by teachers and eco clubs. So they are doing that. Some schools, they have boomerang where kids cannot leave their waste in the school. So they need to bring back whatever they are bringing in the lunchtime, they need to bring back home, all the packaging. So they call boomerang. But during COVID, I noticed that a lot of schools with the snacks program. So now they are giving everything in single-use plastics because of during COVID. So I don't know. Hopefully they will be back and not using much of plastic. So there are great things happening in the TDSB, and TDSB has a really big group of other institutions that goes in the classrooms and talk with kids about environmental issues. We are one of those. We go in classrooms and talk about plastic pollution for grade 5 students. It's a free program. So there are things going on in TDSB, but of course we can always improve and do more for kids. Hopefully in the future they will incorporate more this into the curriculum, specifically about that. They talk about plastic, they talk about management, they talk about government, they are discussing that, but maybe in the future they will have the curriculum just discussing with the kids, and they will learn more the consequences, and this will be for all grades. All kids will learn the same.
I can just add to that, Rafaela, that I was at Centennial College last week, informing the curriculum about reusables. We're getting reusables in the school and in the curriculum, so that their food and beverage programs, which are pretty good programs, is my understanding, they're going to start teaching about reusables. So that's pretty cool. And then actually tomorrow, we are going out with a school in the Junction area to a local cafe where all the kids are going to be having their hot chocolates in Muse reusable cups, and then bringing their cookies home in Muse containers. We're doing that actually all week long. And in the new year, we've got pizza containers coming for schools as well. So it's like, obviously, the more schools take interest and that they're willing to pay an extra little bit, because it does cost a little bit more money than the single-use stuff, then the more we can do it. And that's like private market, right? That's not even put on by the city or by the school board. That's just private and school cooperation.
So there's some cool comments that I just wanted to kind of share. So Sarah has a vision for the future of seeing reusable drop-off containers all throughout. I mean, kind of think about like electric charging stations that are just popping up. So what's the infrastructure of the future? Like, how do we actually create a bit of a vision? So I think that's very interesting. Would love to hear your thoughts on that, or on this other comment, which is, what about the Victoria host comment here in the chat? It says, on the policy question of banning single-use items that are not recyclable, the City of Toronto Waste Wizard app claims that plastic utensils and styrofoam clamshell takeouts are recyclable. And maybe so then, like, what are we actually doing with that? Like, if the city in the policy is kind of not aligned with sort of like a view of reality. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. The city's policy, basically those things are currently collected in the city's bin, but starting in December 2023, the federal ban will override whatever the city has. So while currently the city collects styrofoam and plastic forks that are also made of a type of polystyrene, it's actually really expensive to recycle those, and they're not very good quality like styrofoam. Polystyrene is pretty toxic in its manufacturing stage. There's some evidence that shows that it leaches toxic chemicals into our food when we use it. And then recycling it is actually just so bad. In the state of New York, they were actually looking at banning styrofoam. And one of the justifications for why they did it is they looked at they mentioned Toronto's styrofoam recycling program and how expensive and difficult it was to run. They said, you know what, we just should ban it. So I think this is the right move. Sometimes things are called recyclable, but recycling isn't that great, right? It's just kind of junk cycles. And we know reuse is so much cheaper, so much better for the environment, it makes more jobs. We got all these good reasons to focus on reuse. So that was I hope that was a good answer.
It sounds
answer
like
the question.
a great answer to me. So we have another question here. Well, this is a comment that I want to share and see if anybody wants to, from our distinguished panel would like to address it. So from Bill, I'm appalled by the fact that thousands of Toronto condos, commenting on the separation of recyclables is done so poorly that it's basically just lumped together and sent to the landfill. So can we discuss, the really like poor quality of sorting that happens in condo and multi-residential buildings?
Emily, I know that you work with that. I just want to say something like personal level. I never lived in a building before. And when I moved into Toronto, we were living in a building. And I was like, so surprised you have this shit, it's like a magical hole in the wall and you just put it there and your waste disappeared. It's like, wow, it's incredible. But that comes with the problem because you have only one in my case, and you have to bring downstairs the reusable, the recycling and your food waste as well. So I was doing that, but I understand that for many people, like you have to go downstairs and take the elevator to bring down. So it's a hassle, and I don't know if everyone is wants to do that. So probably this is why I think we see a lot of contamination. But I would love to hear from Emily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see it's getting to 8 o'clock, so I'll just like wrap this up like with this little comment, and then we can do a quick, I've got one final slide on some thoughts. But yeah, T actually had a project called the Zero Waste High Rise Project for a few years, and I invite you guys, you can take a look at our website. But we really found this too. Again, it's sort of a system thing. Sometimes people get blamed. We blame the residents who live in high-rise buildings for not sorting their waste properly. But when you have this magic chute at the end of your hall and you just throw the stuff in there and it's like, oh, that kind of worked. Or, you look in the recycling room and you see there's some garbage mixed in there. You think, oh, nobody in my building cares. But the reality is that like high-rise buildings actually can be real models for zero waste. And there's some really great stories of sort of shared resources and shared space and like professional staff that can actually make high-rise buildings and multi-res buildings even better at waste than at home. So, that's really good. And, more than half of Toronto residents live in multi-unit buildings. So this is something that the city hasn't put enough attention to for a long time. So, yeah, thanks for this. I wish we could just keep talking for another few hours, but I know we gotta go, and we'll do this again soon. I'm just going to quickly share some slides again, unless Vince, did you want to wrap up a few words?
Oh, I just wanted to thank everybody for all of your wonderful participation in the chat and for being here. That was amazing. But yes, you take it away with your final slide.
Okay. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, how do I do this? Sorry, guys. Something like an amateur who's never used Zoom before.
What's a Zoom?
Okay, so thank you everybody for this. It's been really fun. I just want to say, as we're seeing in the chat, you can sign up at reusabletorontO.ca if you're an individual, if you represent a community group, If you represent a business, please join us and like stay connected, because we are going to be ramping up a campaign over the next few months. When our counselors are saying, how do we deal with single use? We want them to think, oh yeah, reuse. We want them to see it everywhere. We want them to hear it from their residents. We want to hear it from local businesses. We want to make this like a no-brainer. Of course, reuse is the answer. So follow us, share your reuse success stories. If you've done some cool things, I saw some amazing stories in the chat about like schools that are doing stuff like this. Tell us those things, because that's really helpful. And you know, if you want to get more involved, let us know. We've also got a little survey at the end of this. When you close your renewal, you'll get a little survey. Let us know if you want to get more involved. We're going to be doing a lot more outreach to community groups across the city. We're going to be meeting with counselors, talking with businesses, and we'll need a whole bunch of people to help us do that. So that's it. And thank you to everybody on the Reusable Toronto Steering Committee. Thank you everybody for joining us. This was really fun. And have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. I just want to say that we all are part of solution, even individually. We think that, oh no, we are not making the difference, even in small things. If all of us are doing small things every day, it will make a difference. So keep doing what you are doing, and let's work together.
Yay. Thank you.
So much, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
How do I